Our relationship with the United States will never again be the same as it was.
Washington thought it had Canada mapped out. Not just politically, but psychologically. A country that values stability over confrontation. A partner that avoids friction. A government that prefers quiet coordination instead of sudden shifts. For years, that assumption shaped every interaction between Ottawa and Washington. It shaped trade expectations. It shaped diplomatic tone. And it shaped the belief that when pressure comes from the South, Canada eventually adjusts. That belief held, until now. Because the move Mark Carney just made wasn't loud enough to trigger panic headlines, but it was decisive enough to force Washington to stop, reassess, and quietly ask a question it wasn't ready for. What if Canada doesn't move the way we expect? For weeks, subtle pressure had been building. Not the kind that makes news, but the kind that matters more. Delays. Signals. Carefully worded messages sent through diplomatic channels. The expectation was simple: Canada would respond quickly, soften its stance, and keep everything calm. Carney didn't. Instead, he waited. And that waiting period created discomfort in Washington. Because silence, when paired with preparation, is never accidental. In Washington, speed is often mistaken for strength. Immediate reactions signal engagement. Quick responses signal alignment. But Carney understood something different: real leverage comes from timing, not urgency. When he finally moved, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactive. And it wasn't defensive. It was structural. Rather than addressing pressure point by point, Carney shifted the conversation entirely. He reframed Canada's position around long-term economic resilience, strategic independence, and institutional stability. That shift alone changed the rules of engagement. Washington was prepared to negotiate details. It was not prepared to renegotiate assumptions. Carney didn't challenge Washington directly. He challenged the idea that Canada's default role is to follow. And that's what made the move unsettling. Because for decades, Canada was viewed as dependable, aligned, and ultimately flexible when things became uncomfortable. That predictability worked, for Washington. Carney disrupted it. By emphasizing diversified trade pathways, domestic economic strength, and long-term planning that does not revolve around U.S. political cycles, he made one thing clear: cooperation is valuable, but it is not automatic. That sentence doesn't sound dramatic. But in global politics, it is disruptive. Because power doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from alternatives. And suddenly, Washington was forced to acknowledge something it had long taken for granted: Canada has options. This wasn't about walking away. It wasn't about escalation. It was about recalibration. Inside Washington, analysts began quietly reassessing their position. Not because Carney threatened consequences, but because he removed certainty. Uncertainty is dangerous for planners. And Carney introduced it calmly. What made this move even more effective was how little he explained it. There were no long speeches. No dramatic warnings. No public ultimatums. Just a clear shift in posture. And posture matters. Because when a country changes how it stands, every partner adjusts how they approach. Carney's approach signaled that Canada is no longer interested in short-term reassurance at the expense of long-term leverage. That stability does not require submission. And that calm leadership can still draw firm boundaries. That message landed. Markets responded with steadiness, not volatility. Institutions responded with confidence, not hesitation. And international partners took notice, not because Canada was loud, but because it was composed. Washington didn't expect that. It expected noise. It expected urgency. It expected the familiar rhythm of pressure followed by accommodation. Instead, it encountered something far more difficult to counter: confidence without confrontation. Critics may argue that Carney's move lacked aggression. That it didn't stand up loudly enough. But that criticism misunderstands the moment. Aggression invites resistance. Calm strength forces adaptation. Carney chose the latter. And in doing so, he aligned his strategy with a broader shift inside Canada itself. Canadians are tired of reactive politics. Tired of leadership driven by fear of markets, fear of allies, fear of disruption. They want stability, but not at the cost of dignity. Carney delivered exactly that balance. No panic. No theatrics. Just direction. And that direction is what Washington now has to deal with. Because behind closed doors, negotiations are shaped less by words and more by expectations. And Carney reset those expectations. Canada is no longer waiting to see how Washington frames the next move. It is setting its own terms. That doesn't mean conflict. It means clarity. And clarity, in diplomacy, is powerful. This moment may not dominate headlines tomorrow. It may not trend for weeks. But it will quietly shape future negotiations, trade dynamics, and political calculations. Because once a country demonstrates that it can act independently, calmly, confidently, and without drama, every partner must adjust. Washington is now adjusting. Not because it was challenged publicly, but because it was surprised privately. And surprise is never comfortable for power. Carney didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He didn't overplay his hand. He simply moved forward with intention. And that is why this moment matters. Because leadership isn't measured by reaction speed, it's measured by how little explanation is required when a decision is made. Canada didn't retreat. It didn't provoke. It didn't hesitate. It acted. And Washington felt it. Did Mark Carney just change the game for Canada? Comment below your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for daily updates on Canadian politics, economy, and international relations.